go ahead and get started. We don't have a lot of people in yet, but like he said, it's going to be recorded, and everyone is free to join at any time. So I'm going to be talking about security testing, and I'm going to preface that by saying I'm going to be talking primarily about penetration testing. There are a lot of ways to go with this. I could talk about like security, SAS and DAS tools, which is static and dynamic application security testing tools, but I wanted this talk to be a little more agnostic, not tool-based necessarily, and also really geared toward QA. So there's a lot of different security roles, but I feel like penetration testing is the best fit for a QA person, probably the easiest to learn about, and it's what I've chosen to go into. So that's going to be my focus today. It's geared toward intro people who maybe don't know that much about security and want a way to get into the field, looking for resources and ways to get started. Less of a coding example type talk than a career-based type talk. That makes sense. So a little bit about me. I've been in QA for 7 years. My name's Julie Lorson. I am a QA professional between jobs right now, about to start a new job in a couple of days. And I have a variety of experience between QA and NOC, but recently I got a scholarship for the SANS Academy. So SANS is a training group. It's considered world-class. They have really good instructors, and it focuses on the GAC exams. So as a boot camp, you get 3 different exams in one go, and you normally have 6 months per exam. When you're taking them individually. When you're taking them all at once, you have 6 months for all 3 of them. So there's a basic exam, GSEC, an incident handling exam, and then there's elective. For the elective, a lot of people chose web application penetration testing, especially everyone QA pretty much chose that. So that's kind of what I've been studying right now, trying to pivot more into a pen tester type role. I will also say that SANS Academy scholarships are usually targeted at women and minorities, and I was able to get one, and it saved me about $21,000 because there's $7,000 a class, and the only reason I got it was I went to a DevSecOps meetup, and if I didn't go to that meetup, I wouldn't have heard about the scholarship. So, take that for what you will. If you're new to security, there's some terms that go around that you'll hear a lot, and 2 of them are red team and blue team. If you hear the term purple team, that's a combination of red team and blue team. So red team is on the offense. It's the ethical hacking, penetration testing. It's that cool hacking stuff. Blue team is the defense. So blue team and red team often have like incident response type challenges where they pit against each other in a company to try to fortify the security position of the company. Someone attacks, someone's defending. And the defending roles in blue team jobs are things like incident response, threat hunting, security. They're the people who look like, you you have to have no experience in security to get a SANS scholarship. I will say that was true. For the scholarships, I had to have experience. They wanted a little bit of IT general experience, and almost everyone they chose for the scholarship. There were 14 of us that went to Dallas. We all had some sort of bachelor's in something similar to IT, but none of us had cybersecurity specifically. So that seems to be what they were looking for. Just an FYI. Anyway. Blue team is, again, people who are doing the incident response and things like that. And a lot of people start off getting into security by going blue team. Blue team is considered like a prerequisite for getting a red team type job. I'm not choosing to do this because I have like sort of PTSD of being in a NOC, and someone can tell me if this is wrong or right, but NOC and a SOC, which is a security operations center, seem very similar. A little PTSD because, I was making like $30,000 a year. I was working all sorts of weird hours. And I don't really want to go into a SOC because I'm a little afraid of things like that happening again. So I'm trying to pivot directly into red team, skipping blue team. And the way I'm doing that is I'm going to try to do penetration testing at the next job that I have. And if I can't do it there, I'm going to spend nights and weekends working on the specific pen testing skills that will help me pivot eventually. And I will give you some of those resources later on in the talk. Okay, so I have not described penetration testing yet. Penetration testing is vulnerability scan plus exploiting. Vulnerability scans, that's just a way that you search your network, your web application, your infrastructure for vulnerabilities. And they have tools to do that. A lot of people start on the network vulnerability scanning side with tools like Nessus, and those are a little bit more thorough. On the web application side, they're not as thorough. They don't catch as much. For vulnerability scanning, it is just reading the results of that scan, but not necessarily doing anything with it. Doing something with it is the exploiting. It could be a proof of concept, or it could be an actual, harmful exploit, proving that this vulnerability is an issue, and here's how I can attack it. I also use the terms network penetration testing, web application penetration testing. There's multiple different types of penetration testing. So you can go into mobile, can go into wireless. Network is considered like a starting point, but I know at the application level, that's where most QA people are. That's where a lot of people in this scholarship kind of chose to focus because it's what we have the most experience in. I'm not going to target this toward network penetration testing because I assume that, and this is an assumption, that in QA generally we have a little bit less networking experience than we do web application experience. So what I want to kind of distill to everybody is that there's a lot of overlaps between security testing and QA. In a lot of ways, reading the books about this web application penetration testing exam that I'm taking felt a lot like reading how to be a tester in general. Some of the skill sets and some of the lessons learned that they hammered in this course were things that we already know as a QA person. For instance, they want to impress upon you that manual and automation work together, and that automation is not going to take your job, that there's always a place for manual. They want to impress upon you that tests and results of these scans can produce false positives and negatives, and they have to be analyzed. They impress upon you that you have to be someone who delicately, says no about the fact that there is a vulnerability, that maybe, we don't want to move this to the next level. We don't want to move this to approved because there is a bug here. And trying to reproduce that bug and explain that bug in a way that documents it thoroughly and says to the developer and back to the project manager why the bug is an issue without attacking a developer, without making it personal, being diplomatic about the risks that you find in your application. That's something we already do. And then there's things like shift left is a big thing in security. Obviously, it's been a big thing in QA for a while. There's things like scripting and coding skills are said to be very important when you're in the security realm. A lot of us already have that, especially if you're doing automation. And then logic attacks, I'll get into in a couple slides. There's also a lot of skills that you guys already have just by being in QA that will help you become a security person. So for instance, one of the books focuses on reading the DOM and getting into the browser and getting into the development tools. So things that you already do when you're analyzing a application, when you open up Console Developer, and when you look at HTTP requests and responses. That was a whole book of the 5 books in my exam was on telling you what the DOM is, telling you what JavaScript is, and telling you what these HTTP responses, 101, 401, whatever, what they mean. So you already have that background. You already are used to making reporting and communication tools and letting management know. You're already used to documenting bugs. You have some application knowledge if you're trying to pivot internally to security. The things that people didn't have so much of, in my experience, was networking, Linux, hardware, bash scripting. And then if you're doing Selenium, you're usually doing some sort of automation tool, but not necessarily Python. Security, in general, these people know a lot of Python. They do most of their scripting in Python. And then they do a lot of Linux command line stuff. So if you're a little bit unfamiliar with that, those are areas you can beef up. And then you will have this, ginormous skill set from already being a QA person. And then one thing that was kind of funny to me just reading through this material was there's a whole section in the OWASP testing guide, it's the OTG on business logic. And you can see this slide. These are examples of logic flaws according to the OTG. So testing the business logic data validation, test the number of times a function can be used, test for circumventing workflows, test defenses against application misuse, testing upload of unexpected file types. This doesn't read as security as much to me as just testing. It is security testing, but it is impressive how many times they go over logic flaws in the OTG in this course, and how relatable it is as a QA person. So you can actually download the OTG, get it from Amazon. It's on Kindle. I think it's $11. And even if you're new to QA, it's an interesting guide to just read through all the different ways that they would test an application and compare it to how you're testing an application. The number one thing I want to impress on you guys is that a security mindset is crucial to making this pivot, but you've already made that QA mindset pivot before, or you had it, by your own natural talents, but you've expanded upon it. So the QA mindset is something where, we've been taught that quality is everyone's responsibility, and we've all had to shift to that mindset. Similarly, I want you to think of security as also being a little bit of everyone's responsibility and shifting to that mindset. And that's what you need to go into these interviews with this mindset. So, for instance, there is one security person on average for about 100 developers. And then you think of how many QA people there are to developers. So there are very few security people to QA and very few security people in general. This is an area where, especially if you don't necessarily want to go SDET and pure automation, or maybe programming isn't your thing, you're still going to have some programming, don't get me wrong. But security is an area where you can kind of become an expert and translate those security issues to the developers in a way that the security people don't have time for, because there are so few of them and they don't have time to train the whole team. And similarly, like, developers are not always going to go out and look for security information and look for secure coding best practices on their own. And it's also just not taught to them. So cybersecurity degrees are kind of a new thing, and there's a lot of courses. ACC has a lot of courses, but they're not part of a general computer science curriculum. So any new, junior developer that comes out of college is probably not going to have these skills, and you can help them out by pointing, potential security flaws, potential secure coding issues, and you can really bump up the value of your career by adding this to your skill set. So, one way of thinking about the security mindset is that security problems are just bugs. So that's Linus Torvalds, obviously the creator of Linux. Every time that you look at a bug, if you have the security mindset, you can think about, for example, an input field. If there's no max length validation on that input field, there's multiple ways that this, could cause issues with the UI. If the input field is only 8 characters long and I enter, for instance, I go to qahatesyou.com and I copy the Hamlet test, which is the entire verbiage of the Hamlet in one big block code, and I paste it into that field. It's one of my favorite tests. It could result in that text overflowing the input box field and spilling out on the screen and looking very bad from a UI perspective. It could potentially crash the application from a performance perspective. But now, if you have some security experience, you could read up on buffer overflow attacks, and you could know how that bug could create a problem from a security perspective. It gives you a little more persuasiveness in your bug reporting, and a little bit more, basically just, it makes your security bugs a little bit more persuasive because you have it from multiple angles. One thing that I would recommend to everybody, if you've never tried this before, as like kind of a introduction step into security, is getting an interception proxy and learning a little bit about fuzzing. So an interception proxy, the big ones are Burp, Zap, Charles, and Fiddler. I don't hear about the last two as much. Burp is by Portswigger, Zap is by OWASP. I have actually, if you can see, no, I'm just gonna leave this slide up. So Burp and Zap interception proxies sit on your host machine, and then what you do is you open up a browser, and you can create some, either an extension or grab an extension such as Proxy Switchy Omega or Foxy Proxy, and you can set the port of your browser. Usually people use Firefox. Set the browser to 8080. Set your interception proxy on something like 8080, and then your interception proxy takes and grabs everything that is coming through from the browser. So it's kind of like the network tab in the console web developer. It has, the requests and the responses, and you can also click on these different requests and responses, and you can manipulate them. So you can right click and you can, send to repeater, which would be just to repeat that API request. And you can do different things with the parameters in that request. So fuzzing is taking those parameters and applying a lot of different load to them, a lot of different, trying to think of the word. But basically you have a word list or a giant list, we call it the big list of naughty strings as one example, of different attacks or different, strings, different characters, different integers. Fuzzing, you take all those line by line and you plug them into the payloads, and then you can apply all those different payloads at once, and it kind of automates doing boundary tests and different values into your payloads. And it's a really easy way to just kind of get used to these tools, because when you're in security, you're going to be using tools like Burp and Zap a lot. You can do this as sort of a way that you already have your manual testing of APIs where you manipulate the strings and maybe, try to do a null string or try to do a negative integer when you're only supposed to be accepting a positive integer. You're just doing that times, all of the different parameters in your word list. So it's something you can do. There's a lot of different attack tools though on Burp and Zap. So I would be careful doing anything more than fuzzing as part of your job. And I would definitely not do it against prod, obviously. I think we all know that, but keep it in a sandbox, keep it to your QA environment. And because I said, there's various attack tools, what I want to tell you on this slide is that the difference between a penetration tester and a hacker is basically permission. I have lived by the motto of ask for forgiveness and not permission for a lot of my career. You cannot have that motto in cybersecurity. The name of the book is the OWASP Testing Guide, the OTG. I think we're on version 4. So, back there. Permission means written permission in this instance. If you're doing anything other than a test on your own system against an intentionally vulnerable application, and we'll talk about that, if you're doing it for your company, you have to have something in writing, and it has to be from someone who has the permission and the authorization to grant you that. There have been cases where somebody, as a penetration tester, just doing their job, actually even had permission, written permission from somebody that they thought had the authorization to give them the permission, and that person didn't, and the penetration tester got in trouble legally. So this is a very big deal. Generally, get it from a C-level executive to protect yourself, CYA, and everything I'm going to tell you about from this point on, use against an intentionally vulnerable application in a sandbox environment, or use it on your QA environment with permission. So I want to tell you about 2 types of attacks, cross-site scripting and SQL injection, just to give you a little bit of an idea on what a penetration tester does. Otherwise, it's just, going to be me talking to you about your career goals. I want you to have an example in mind. So for instance, cross-site scripting. A web page has the example.com website and then /AHTML. That means that website has the origin example.com. Cross-site scripting, the cross is for the idea that it's crossing over. It's not the origin. You're having a malicious script, an external script in this web page, and it's not coming from the origin, but it has to look like it's coming from the origin. So you have to trick a user in cross-site scripting or request forgery, which is very similar to clicking that link and they think it's coming from the site that they want, but it's really coming from you as an attacker. A proof of concept usually on cross-site scripting is the alert box. Obviously, a pop-up of an alert box, even if it says you've been attacked, isn't very glamorous, but it's just considered the first proof of concept. Your minimal viable product is getting in and plugging in that script tag. But any website that has some security into it, it has some filtering. So you have to be a little more creative usually. You can't necessarily do a script tag. You might have to put in an image source and then on error in the tag. So when it's looking for that HTML tag, kind of that tag field, and it doesn't see what it's looking for, it goes to the error, and then the error has a payload. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. Filter testing is determining what characters get filtered or encoded. So you do your reflection test, you do your filter test, and you see what actually can go through. A reflection test means that if I put in an input into a field, so if the input says enter your name and I enter Julie, does it reflect back Julie? Does it say hello Julie somewhere under the input field? If you have reflection in one of your applications, that is a sign that it may be vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Then you begin your filter test. Then you enter a manual POC payload, maybe typing a script tag in or something else. And then from there you go to your automated POC payload. So you can use tools such as BEEF or Metasploit. BEEF is capital B, small e, capital E, capital F. Metasploit is another tool. It comes with a lot of different types of flavors of Linux. Those are two things I don't have enough time to get into now, but if you're looking to start on cross-site scripting, those are the main tools that you would use. Ooh, I have some resources. I can try to type them into the chat too. So for instance, you can go to even Wikipedia or some of these blogs, and you can learn more about cross-site scripting. Here's some examples of areas where you can go do it. And I will post these links either, I'm going to post the entire Google slides to the Meetup group, or I'll just put the links in the Meetup. But you're free to, write any of these down in the meantime, go to them and favorite them in your browser. But links will be shared, don't worry. Okay, SQL injection. If you don't know the XKCD cartoon, Little Bobby Tables, look it up. It's pretty hilarious. The idea of SQL injection is you take a normal query. Say instead of Julie, I have that input field where it's looking for a name, and I enter Bobby. On the back end, it's going to do some sort of database query, such as select all from users where name is Bobby, assuming this is a normal relational database. From there, you're going to try to guess which database it's using and try to get an error and try to get information about that database. The more errors you can get, the better. This is something that I had an issue with my last job. It's something that you can help as a tester, where some developers like to throw as many errors as they can on the screen. And they like to give that user as much information as possible. Sometimes that information could be things like, the server and the database you're using on the back end. That is not the best information to be showing to just any user. It can be exploited. So if I intentionally create something like an extra quotation on the end of this field and I get an error saying, there's a MySQL error, now I know how to craft my attack. I know that it's going to require MySQL type injection as opposed to MS SQL or Oracle. So this is a very toned down version of this. From then, if I know I can put an error, I know I'm getting something back, I can do a payload. The quintessential payload is the tautology 1 = 1, because it always means true, right? It doesn't actually matter that it's 1 and 1. It can be 0 = 0 or anything that equals true. And in computer logic, something that is true with an OR always returns true. So when you type something like that, it may return the entire database, all the users in the database. And this is considered, jackpot for any type of hacker that's trying to steal data. And finally, similar to cross-site scripting, you use automation tools at the last portion. Once you've considered a payload manually and you've proven that you can do SQL injection or you can do cross-site scripting, use an automated tool to make your life a little bit easier. This one is SQL Map, so feel free to look at that. And again, I have resources. I'm going to put these links on Meetup. These are different ways you can learn about SQL injection, little cheat sheets and things like that. Again, you'll see things like OWASP.org come in a lot on this talk. OWASP is a site that provides a lot of free community information on anything you need to know about security. Anything that you want to know about any of these things that I'm talking about, go to OWASP and they will have information for you. Okay, how do I get into penetration testing? How do I enhance my knowledge about it? And how do I start my career doing it? Well, a few ways to do this are capture the flags and bug bounties. I have a few links down there, but Hack the Box is the standard CTF I always hear about. It's just when you go to that, hackthebox.ed or EU, it has a login password input field. The goal is to hack it. The goal is to try to figure out what that password and username set would be and get into it yourself. And from then on, once you've hacked the box, you get a series of challenges and it presents you with this kind of curriculum to go through and hack the box in more advanced ways. It's a really good site. I definitely recommend it for getting started. You can look up the answers to how to get into the Hack the Box, but I would encourage you to try to do other resources and look up ways of username harvesting and get some passwords first. Bug bounties are when a company reaches out to the internet and says, hey, we want to try to find bugs in this application. Anyone who finds a bug will get a bounty. So you don't get paid unless you find a bug. But it is a way to not have to hire an expensive penetration testing consulting firm. And it is a way to get experience on your end. It is a win-win for both the company and you. Another way, if you really want penetration experience, but you can't necessarily do that at your day job, is to offer penetration tests to companies who might be smaller, who might want a penetration test, but maybe can't afford it. So I would recommend kind of creating a cheat sheet on your own, grabbing a list of resources and start indexing the ways that you would go through a penetration test on an application and use that as your template to go in and create a penetration test on one of these companies that hopefully will let you provide your services. But there's also a lot of free training, and I've included some not free training. So this is where I'd recommend people to start if they're wanting to get in. Portswigger is the company that creates Burp Suite. It also has a book, Web Application Hackers, make sure I'm saying that right, Web Application Hackers Handbook. And they've been putting out new version of these for a while, but they've stopped putting it in a book format, and now they're moving over completely to the web in this web security course that they have. So it's a good curriculum. It's very thoroughly set up. It's lab-based. They have a lot of labs. I really like it. That would be my first recommendation. You also have Bug Crowd University. So that is a combination of a lot of webinars and GitHub links. There's a little bit less structure, but there's a lot of free info. It's like going to YouTube, but for hackers. Pen Tester Lab Bootcamp. That is a series of wiki links. If you're looking to get started and you don't have a ton of time, you can go through that bootcamp fairly quickly because it is just wiki links, and it does lay out a curriculum. So it provides some structure, but it's not, terribly hard to get into. And then once you go through that bootcamp, you can sign up for Pen Tester Lab and get all their labs and courses, and it's about $20 a month. So out of all of the training that is paid for, that seemed to be about the cheapest. Hackingtutorials.com or .org, is mostly, free. There's some paid labs, but there's a lot of free stuff there. Not as, into that as the other three, but a lot of free videos. And then for not free training, Linux Academy, I know Evan and I talk about it a lot. It's still great to learn because if you're going into cybersecurity, you want to get Linux skills, and they have a lot of resources for that, but they don't have a ton of security. There's like 4 modules. There's still a little bit of, Linux and cloud-based security, still worth checking out. But for mostly cybersecurity stuff, try practicalpentestlabs.com. That one has these labs grouped on difficulty levels, which I really like, going from, easy to the most difficult. And it also only has like a one-time payment. So, all of these look like they're monthly or yearly fees. Practical Pentest Labs is just one time. Virtual Hacking Labs is more toward the OSCP, which I'm going to talk about these different certifications too. But, that's more network-based. It's really lab-based. It's good if you're specifically targeting that cert. Pentest Academy, a little bit expensive. Both Cybrary and Pentester Academy are around the same price. Can be around $250 or more a year, or I think around $40 a month. But they have a lot of good stuff. I really like both of them. I chose Cybrary. I decided, I'm going to go with non-free training because I also want to learn cloud and networking stuff and get my CCNA again. So Cybrary had a CCNA path. So far, it's pretty good. Okay, so another thing I'd recommend as part of, getting started, including the interception proxies, set up a lab. This could be as little as a basic lab where you have a computer. It could just be your regular computer or another computer with VMs, and you want at least 2 VMs because you're going to have a VM that's the hacker and a VM that you're targeting. You can use free resources like Windows Hyper-V, VirtualBox, or VMware Fusion. And Windows also has, 90-day evaluations of different VMs. They let you do 6 months free on a Windows server. I believe the one that I use for my labs is VMware Fusion, and I'm doing the paid subscription. It's not too expensive, and it gets me everything I need. If you want, you can do a more advanced lab, and that's good for learning more about firewalls and networking, get some networking equipment, get an actual dedicated computer and server and set it up. It looks a little bit more impressive and it gets you a little more experience. But if you're just doing the VMs, you can get a Kali Linux or a Parrot OS ISO. And I would recommend having at least, one of those operating systems be Linux. Kali is, I think it's by the same people who did OSCP, Offensive Security. So it has a lot of built-in security tools already. And Parrot is a new thing that I have not tried myself, but it seems to be taking over from Kali Linux. If you don't really want to do a new Linux box and you're already used to Debian or Ubuntu, you can apply the PTF, that's a script from TrustedSec, and it will give you some of these scripts to do security testing and ethical hacking. Same for Windows. You can do Commando VM from FireEye, and that will give you some scripts. So that's my recommendation. Set up a lab. That way you have a box, your own little sandbox to do your penetration testing in. And you don't have to worry about trying to get permission from your company and maybe crashing QA. Hopefully just QA, but you can do it on your own time with your lab. Yeah, good point. Also, you can spin up VMs in any sort of cloud environment. You don't have to have it on your computer all the time. You can spin it up and shut it down as you need, create as many as you want on AWS or any cloud service. Now, the next thing is you want your VMs and applications to be intentionally vulnerable. When you're getting started with security, you don't just want to hack any site. There are tons of free resources that are purposely vulnerable applications and VMs. VulnHub is a great resource for these intentionally vulnerable VMs. Or, this OWASP project, I can put these links again in the chat or Meetup afterwards, but they have intentionally vulnerable web applications. They have a whole directory of them. This site here, mnhardikar.com, is another list of, it seems like at least 100 of these intentionally vulnerable VMs and apps. OWASP has at least 3 that I know about. I think they have much more, but Matilde, WebGoat, JuiceBox. We use Matilde for our training. There's a YouTube called, the user is Weaponized, and he does a lot of tutorials on Matilde. So Matilde is set up where it has a lot of different links. You go to different pages and it'll do different input boxes or such, and they will be intentionally vulnerable against things like SQL injection. So it's a great place to play in. You have your damn vulnerable web app, you have Metasploitable from Rapid7. Set up your lab, set up your VMs, set up these targets, and then you're ready to go. Meet new people. So I have a lot of resources for just, it's similar to how you guys hopefully use this meetup. You can go to the OWASP Austin chapter and join some of their meetups, listen to their conferences. B-sides conferences were really big in the group that I was at. A lot of people who were taking this course with me really loved going to them. I don't know how that's going to work after COVID, but hopefully they'll come back and you can join those. HA is Hackers Anonymous with an exclamation point after it, and whatever is in front of it is the city you're in. So we have Austin Hackers Anonymous. The Pwn School Project, no O there, just PWN, is a Dallas meetup that I started attending this month, and it's really good. They had a whole session on Hack the Box that they went into really detail on what's in Hack the Box, and they did their own presentations. AHA also does presentations instead of one person talking at you like I'm doing now for an hour. Everybody tries to do little 5-minute presentations in that group. HackerOne is a company, but they have a lot of resources. So, I signed up for them, and a lot of different companies that do security will have a lot of different resources. So for instance, go to, Rapid7, go to Black Hills Security, and they will have their own YouTube and webinar links that they put out. And they're good to follow even though they're, companies and not meetups. But talk to as many people as you can, and I will definitely post all of these so you can steal links. Certifications. So like I said in the beginning, the thing that they're looking for most often in an interview or when you're looking for a pen test job, I think, is mindset and experience. I think it's more important to get those labs set up, go through some courses and learn what you can about, things like Crosssite scripting and SQL injection tasks, and then practice doing them over and over again. I think that's more important. But if you want to get a cert to just get started, since, I am on the cert track, here's what the different types of certs are, the big ones. So offensive security is one of the biggest. I think offensive security and SANS are kind of considered top tier, more the world-class certifications that everyone wants. Offensive security has the OSCP, but the OSCP does require 1 to 2 years experience, or at least recommends that. And it is network penetration testing based. It's not web app. The PWK is their web application. But not a lot of people know about that certification. They're more looking for the OSCP. So I don't necessarily recommend people start with the OSCP. It's not an entry-level certification. SANS is the company that I'm obviously going through. The GWAP is a web application penetration testing certification that I am getting, but they also have GPen, which is network-based. GXPen is the advanced version of that. And they also have a graduate certificate program. So you can take all their different penetration testing courses, and if you take 4 or 5 of them in a row, and then you take a capstone, you can get this graduate certificate. The courses are about $7,000 each though. So not necessarily entry level at the penetration testing part of their courses, and also a little bit expensive, but you can use them toward a master's program. So if you're like me and you like applying certs for college credit, it's a great way to do that. Also, they have very good trainers, and the in-house experience of going to a place to learn. When I went to a hotel in Dallas, but we had an instructor who was very good, and we spent the whole week with him. And I think that's more valuable than studying for a cert on your own, just having that experience. So you can, once COVID is over, go and take these trainings in person. E-learn security is what I think I'd recommend for people, even though I haven't done it myself, because the e-learn security doesn't have as much barriers. They're not as expensive. They don't require you to have multiple years of experience in security. And there's a junior penetration testing cert. I believe there's also mobile penetration testing certs, and just a large variety of different certs. But the important thing for me would be, they're $400 each versus $7,000 or $1,000. ECC Council has a CEH and recently has micro degrees with things like Python security testing, PHP security testing. Micro degrees are interesting to me. The CEH is, considered a gateway standard, and it will help you get a job, but I don't think a lot of security people really like it that much. It's more geared toward government and DoD people. That's who want to see a CEH. That's their criteria. It also, they want you to have 2 active years in InfoSec to certify, and it is theory-based. There's no lab, which I don't like. SANS at least has some of the lab. Like I said, OSCP is like all lab, but CH is a little too much theory. I don't think maybe I would start with that, and it is $1,200. Other certifications people have in security, CISSP is a good one. It is considered not an entry-level cert. A lot of people really like it. I'm getting to that. But, it does require 5 years experience to certify. So, you can study for it, but you need that experience to actually get it. And if you don't have that experience. So next one, Security Plus. And I think they even now have a Pen Test Plus. So CompTIA has a lot of different certs that you can get that are not very expensive. They're considered entry level. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them if you've been in the industry for a while. It seems kind of odd to go get an A+ or Network Plus or Security Plus if you've been in the industry a while, because they are considered so entry level. But if you've just been doing QA and web application testing, and maybe you came from a different domain background, I came from networking. If you don't have a hardware customer service, help desk troubleshooting type background, or you haven't worked in networking, it might be good to get the A+ and the Net Plus, and then maybe the SEC+ or a different type of cert on top of that, because they're pretty easy to study for. They're not really hard tests. They're all theoretical. So again, this is one that I'm getting. It's a GIAC Web Application Penetration Tester. It's the 3rd certificate in this program that I'm in. And I will tell you, if you're going to go for the SANS certification, there is a specific way to pass the test. Please ignore my cat screaming in the background. They call it the Pancake Method because it's an open book test. So the Pancake Method is you create your own index, in Google Sheets or Excel, and you just go through for every page, put the page number by it, put the specific terminology or the keyword that you think will be on the test, and then maybe some notes in the 3rd column. And they recommend you get these little sticky tabs and you color code them, and you put each sticky tab over every different part of the module. So the sticky tab being, pink, maybe you go into Excel and you code that row pink. That's a little bit overkill. I didn't do the sticky tab stuff, but I will say that I did do the indexing, and then I read through each book about 3 or 4 times at least, and then I did each lab about twice, and that's a method that I used to pass, all the previous exams. I don't think Pancake is an acronym. I don't know why they call it that, but it's also good if you have open book tests in general. Look up the Pancake method, just because it can help if they let you bring in indexes or whatever you want. It's a good way of trying to pass these open book exams. And GWAP being open book means that they do try to make it a little tricky. It's not like there's only one good answer out of a multiple choice question bank. The question may have 3 or 4 answers that are worded in a way where like they could be right, they could be wrong, but they're looking for a best of the multiple choice answers. So you really have to have read through and get the whole context of the course before you answer that question. You can't just go look in your index to a specific part of the book. It's never going to be that straightforward. Don't know what MC is. Feel free to type. Oh, yes, open book with multiple choice. Every GEOC exam from the GSEC, which is the intro, I think there's even one before that, an intro for people who don't have IT experience, but the GSEC, the one I took, and the GCIH, all multiple choice. The only thing is some of the exams at the end will have a lab portion. I actually really like that. I don't think the GWAP has it at all, but the GSEC, the incident handling exam, has a lab portion, and I really like that. But it's going to be more theory than lab, unfortunately. Yes, and I will also say that the exams were anywhere between 2 and 5 hours. So not that fun taking 5-hour practice tests. I took 2 of them before I took my last test. But there's a reason why they're considered very good exams, and they're really high regarded in the industry. You have to really, really know your stuff. All right, blogs and books that I recommend. Tangled Web by Zelinsky is a guide on securing web applications. It was the one recommended with the GWAP. Also, Web Application Hacker's Handbook has always been a favorite standard of mine. Again, it is by Portswigger. That's a company that is having their own web security lab that I've posted about. So portswigger.com, web security lab, and academy. I think they call it Academy, is replacing the Hacker's Handbook, and there's not going to be any more Hacker's Handbook. Also, this penetration testing book, I believe Georgia Weinman, the Hacker's Playbook 2 and 3. I believe 2 is for blue team, 3 is for red team. Red team field manual. There's also a blue team field manual. Those are all good books to check out if you're interested in a book and you're like me and you can only spend like about 10 hours on a computer every day before like your eyes just go cross and you need something written. Different blogs like pentestsands.org, they have SANS, the company that I'm going through, they have their own pen test blog. Rapid7 also has a blog called This One Time on a Pen Test. And then Black Hill, another company, has a security blog. And then Krebs on Security is the one that I hear about more than anything else. Anytime there's like a big breach, the article that gets shared around it is the Krebs on Security. Okay, and then for a little bit more info, I just got done with Test Bash. I kind of was on that this morning. Test Bash is Ministry of Testing. I'm always gonna, recommend Ministry of Testing for everything because they helped me get started in QA. They've always been a great resource. It's a UK company, and you just can pay a pro subscription of a few hundred a year, or you can join their free stuff and get all sorts of webinars, all sorts of classes, and they have a whole section of security on them, and it's all for QA people, so it's geared toward QA people. And they even have like a 30 days of learning security, so they'll give you like a little curriculum of things to look up every day in 30 days. You can follow people on YouTube, like Jason Haddix is really big in the industry. Evan and I always recommend Joe Colantonio's podcast. We really like him. We've learned a lot from him, and he has a podcast now dedicated specifically to security called the Test Guild Security Testing Podcast, in addition to his normal one. OWASP Pen Testing Guide and PTS frameworks are different frameworks toward getting a guide, a written guide about pen testing. So when you say you want to go the route of approaching companies and offering to do a pen test, or offering to do a pen test at your own company, a good way to start on that is looking up the guide and creating your own little guide and your own little scope of how you're going to pen test something. It's one thing to know how to do a cross-site scripting attack or SQL injection attack. It's another thing to have like a written out guide of how you're going to approach this problem to give to your manager. So you can kind of use that to build your own cheat sheet off of. I definitely recommend creating your own little pen test cheat sheet, like a little, almost like a blog for yourself, and then just adding to it as you increase these skills. And then another thing is to integrate Burp or Zap into your Selenium project. I talked about Burp and Zap earlier. You can create a Selenium framework where you add Burp or Zap into that, and then you do fuzzing as part of your Selenium project. Definitely recommend that. As for advice on selling an employer about SANS training, I will say, I have not got much luck on getting people to pay for any type of training in almost any job I've had. AT&T was the best just because they had a dedicated policy. At the time, it only applied to 4-year degrees. So like I couldn't actually take any certs and get them paid for. It had to be a college class, but they were starting to offer more and more training options by the time I left. And since then, I haven't worked for any company that pays for any type of training. But as a result, I'm really good at scholarships. I am a fairly middle-aged person, and for a middle-aged person, I managed to get a lot of scholarships for my age, which seems a little bit odd, but for every type of conference you can go to, there's usually a scholarship. For every type of boot camp, there's a scholarship. For any kind of little 2-year degree or certification program, try to look for scholarships. That's my best recommendation. Otherwise, I would say if you're going to ask your company to pay for training, a good way to start on doing that is proving that you can give them a benefit to the training. So I would approach it first from the idea of going to like a PTS framework or pen testing guide and writing out, here's a scope, here's, what I plan to do for you guys as part of a pen testing engagement. And here's what I'm learning on your own. Because companies want to see that you're learning on your own, that you're not reliant on them, and you're not waiting for them to pay for training, that you're going to go and be resourceful and look up how to do something. I have to tell my mom, who doesn't know anything about, computers and still thinks that if you go and get a job, like you can get all your training on the job. I kind of use an analogy of like, if I was a rock star, I don't sell out a stadium to practice, learning whatever new song I'm going to do. And I don't, play that new song for the first time on stage. I rehearse it in my own time, ideally, That's what you're going to do as a tester. You're going to research some of this on your own time, and then you're going to go to your company and maybe add training in as a benefit of what you're already doing. That's my recommendation. If anyone has better recommendations, please go ahead, put them in the chat, or feel free to talk about them. It is 5 minutes till. Oh, yay. I almost never end exactly on time, but my LinkedIn is up there. If you want to contact me, I am on the start of this journey myself. I have not set up a lab. I am using my SANS labs right now. I still have about 30 days left on them. So I have to go through and do all this that I talked about with you guys from scratch. And I'm going through this experience with you guys. If you're going through it, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, find me on Slack. Just send me anything you want about what you're doing, or if you have any questions. I'm here to talk to all of you, and I really appreciate, Evan and Katie and Joel for, letting me be a co-organizer and just talking about whatever I want in this meetup. So that's something that we really appreciate, is having community involvement. And as an organizer, I love talking and I love having the opportunity, but I also want the community to come on and give all of your presentations, do requests for white papers, whatever. We're not that actually, we're not that rigid. You just contact us, tell us what you want to talk about. And for the most part, we're happy to have you. So thank you, everybody.